1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 10, the Apostle Paul wrote these words. He said, "By the grace God has given me, I laid a foundation as a wise builder, and someone else is building on it." I wish Billy Haddock was here right now so we could have a little banter with him in terms of talking about those who are wise builders. Billy has been a builder over the years. Don't know where the wisdom came in, but he's been a builder for many, many years and now doing another job over there in Liverpool. But here Paul talks about about God having laid a foundation. And you're going to see in a moment that foundation is none other than Jesus Christ himself. And Paul is saying that I've laid a foundation as a wise builder and someone else is building on it. Friends, I want to say this morning, before we get right into this word, you need to grasp hold of this fact. I don't care who you are, what your background is, what your age is, what your circumstances are. I don't care whether you're in the EU, you're out of the EU, you're for it, you're against it. I don't care whether you're Protestant, Catholic, you're Irish, you're British. Whatever the case is, the bottom line is we're all building a foundation. You're building a foundation. And you can be sure that because you're building a foundation, that someone else is building on that foundation, or someone will build on it. As we dedicate baby Maya today, I want to say to Mark and Danielle that you are building a foundation for this little child. Every parent is building a foundation for their children. And so here Paul is saying, I've laid a foundation as a wise builder and someone else is building on it, but each one should build with care. For no one can lay any foundation other than the one already laid, which is Jesus Christ. So Paul is making it clear the foundation that he's talking about is the foundation of Jesus Christ himself. If anyone builds on this foundation using gold, silver, costly stones, wood, hay, or straw, their work will be shown for what it is, because the day will bring it to light. He's talking there about the day of judgment. And believe me, friends, the day of judgment is on its way. Someone said, and I'm trying to think of who it was, and you can shout it out if you remember, that if God does not judge this generation, he owes an apology to Sodom and Gomorrah. Judgment Day is on its way. And here Paul is saying that on that day, God will bring to light our works. It will be revealed with fire. The fire will test the quality of each person's work. If what has been built survives, the builder will receive a reward. See, he's not talking here about salvation. Let's not confuse things here. Let's not mix things up. Let's not think that this is talking about God's going to judge our works, and as long as we did more good works than bad works, we're going to make it into heaven. That's not what he's saying. He's talking here about people who are already building on the foundation of Jesus Christ. You're already there. You're already saved. He's not questioning the salvation. He's questioning what you're doing with it. And he says, on that day it will be burned up. The builder will suffer loss, but yet will be saved. So even Christians need to keep in mind the fact that someday, as Paul tells us somewhere else, that we're going to be standing before the judgment seat of Christ as believers. It's what's called the mercy seat, the bema seat of Christ. And that we will have to give an account for our actions and our choices even as believers. So the builder will suffer loss, but yet will still be saved, even though only as one escaping through flames. Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple, and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? If anyone destroys God's temple, God will destroy that person. For God's temple is sacred, and you together are that temple. Do not deceive yourselves. If any one of you think you are wise by the standards of this age, some people think, hey, this is 2016. And we don't think the way they thought 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago when the Bible was written way back then. And maybe we don't, but I want to tell you something, God still does. We might have changed, but God is still God. The creator of the universe is still the creator of the universe. The God who so loved the world that he gave his only Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish but have everlasting life. He is still God. He has not changed. And so he says, don't be deceived. If any of you think you're wise by the standards of this age, you should become fools so that you may become wise. In other words, accept the fact that in God's sight, there is no wisdom as far as humanity is concerned. Become fools in God's sight so that you might become wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. The wisdom of this world is foolishness in God's sight. In other words, simply put, let me just put all these comments together in this one sentence. Whoever builds on the foundation of Christ, this is what Paul's saying. Whoever builds on the foundation of Christ in the sight of God is wise. But whoever is building their own foundation and ignoring Christ in the sight of God, they are fools. That's what Paul is saying. So if you build on the foundation of Christ, God is going to see you as one who is wise. But if you build in your own foundation, you ignore Christ, then God sees you today as someone who is foolish. But then let me say this. It's not just about being wise for yourself. It's not just about being wise for you personally. Or it's not just a thing about you being foolish and that it ends with you. You see, the foundation that you build on will most likely be the same foundation that your family will build on. The foundation that you build on will be the foundation that others will build on. And so for that reason, I want to encourage you this morning to build on the foundation of Christ. That's my message. That's my word of encouragement. Build on the foundation of Christ. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus said, anyone who hears his words and puts those words into practice is like a wise man who built his house upon the rock. So that when the storms come, when the winds blow, and the rains come, and the house gets buffeted and beat about by the storms, and the house is shaken, violently shaken, at the end of the storm, Paul, or Jesus himself, was saying that the house on the rock still stands. If you build your house on the rock, it will stand any storm. It will stand the test of any storm. And of course, we know that Jesus Christ himself is the rock. But then he also said that if someone builds their house upon sand, it's like the foolish man. The foolish man who builds his house upon the sand, so when those same storms come, the same winds, the same rain comes, and they buffet that house, when the storm is finished, then the house on the sand has collapsed. Anyone who builds their house on sand will soon discover that it will not endure the test of time and will not endure the storms of life. I don't care whether that's an individual or whether that's a family or whether that's even a nation. Do you know that America was founded on the principles of Christianity? The founding fathers were Christians. The first presidents in America, there are photographs of them on their knees before God time and time again. Now today, we have Muslims coming in to the House of Representatives saying Islamic prayers. A nation that was built on the foundation of Christianity, but in a few hundred years they've moved away from it. Europe was the place of the Reformation, and we all in Northern Ireland know what the Reformation is. Don't we? A lot of people are, what's Reformation? Can hardly say the word, never mind spell it. What do we mean by Reformation? A lot of people even confuse Martin Luther with Martin Luther King Jr. They think it's the same person. But Martin Luther was the man who led the Reformation in Europe, that brought about the establishment of Christianity beyond the Church of Rome. In Europe. And Europe has gotten so far away from the principles of the gospel that it's like a house that's built on sand, and the storms are coming. And the house that's built in the sand is about to fall. And if you build your life and if you build your circumstances on sand, when the storms come, the house will collapse and will fall. And so it's so important that we build on the right foundation, and that you build on the right foundation both for yourself and for your family. The nation of Israel started off as a family. It began with Abraham, and then there was Isaac, and then there was Jacob. Of course, before there was Isaac, Abraham tried to sort things out himself, and so to his maid, he had a son called Ishmael. Ishmael became the father of the Arab nations today. See, the Bible gives you the answers where the nations are from. Many of the Arab nations are descended from Ishmael. But yet Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was the father of 12 sons. Those 12 sons became the 12 fathers of 12 tribes, the 12 tribes of Israel. Jacob's name was changed from Jacob to Israel. So we hear about the sons of Israel, the sons of Jacob. They started as a family. They became a nation. But the problem was that the more the time moved on, the further they got away from those establishing principles of their family and from the foundation that Abraham had laid. The further they moved away from Abraham, the further they moved away in time from the great-grandfather. They moved away from that foundation that Abraham had built. The further they moved away from Abraham's son Isaac, the further they moved away from that foundation. The further they moved away from their father Jacob, the further they moved away from his foundation that was firmly built upon his faith and his belief in Almighty God. So that when it got to the 12 sons, they were no longer building on the same foundation as the great-grandfather Abraham. They were no longer building on the same foundation as their grandfather Isaac. And sadly now, most of them were no longer building upon the foundation laid by their own father, Jacob. They were now doing their own thing. They were not interested in the faith of their forefathers. They were not interested in the faith of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They were now doing their own thing. So they built their own foundation. But sadly, the foundation that they built was a foundation that was to exclude God. A foundation that excluded the God of their fathers. So I wonder how many people in this room today, and you look back in your family situation and you think, well, yeah, I remember that person was a Christian and that person, perhaps a mother, perhaps a grandmother, but there was someone in the family, and you know that that person was praying for your family. But we move away from that person, and we sadly also at times move away from that foundation. So they built a new foundation, a foundation that excluded God, and the result was that they ended up in slavery. See, God had made a promise to Abraham. And let me tell you, friends, God is keeping that promise to Abraham. Even though He made it some 4,000 years ago, God is still keeping that promise to Abraham. Do you know what that promise was? That his descendants, through Isaac and through Jacob, that God would give them a land and it would be theirs forever. Do you know what that land is today? It's called Israel. Do you know why Israel is still in the promised land? I mean, most people here weren't even born when Israel became a nation in 1948. For almost 2,000 years, it did not exist. There was no nation on planet Earth called Israel. It didn't exist. Even the land of Israel didn't exist. They called it Palestine. And yet God had given a promise to Abraham that that land would belong to his descendants forever. So God made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the 12 sons of Jacob, that Israel as a land would be theirs, and that's why they're there today. Not because they are one of the most powerful forces on the planet, which they are. I mean, it's incredible from 1948 to get to the place where they are today. That is miraculous in itself. Anybody wants to know, are there still miracles? You just got to look to Israel, and you will see that that is a living miracle today. And so God had made a promise to Abraham, but the problem was that for 400 years they had been in slavery in Egypt. They'd gotten away from the foundation, and because of that they ended up as slaves in Egypt. But now God remembers His promise, and because of the promise to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, God then sends Moses, and they're led out of captivity. They're led out of slavery. God is fulfilling His word to the descendants of Abraham because of His promise. God brought them out of Egypt, brought them out of slavery. He got them to the Red Sea, and then he got them across the Red Sea over into the wilderness. But I want to make this point. This was the very first time in their lives that they'd ever been to the Red Sea. They were slaves. They'd never ventured beyond the place that the Egyptians had kept them. They now found themselves at the Red Sea. People spend thousands today to go to the Red Sea. They find themselves at the Red Sea. But I want to say today that the Red Sea was not the destination that God had planned for them. And some people stop off short. There was a promised land beyond the Red Sea. That's where God wanted to get them to. They finally got over the Red Sea. They get into the wilderness. And there they are in a place that they'd never been before. Other nations were there. And they had to not only walk their way through, but they had to fight their way through the wilderness. But the wilderness was not their destination. God had something far greater for them. Across the River Jordan, there was the promised land called Canaan. And that was going to be Israel's, because that's the land that God had promised to Abraham long before they went into captivity. But sadly, when you read the story in the book of Exodus and so on, you will see that instead of crossing the Jordan, that they spent 40 years wandering in the wilderness. 40 years going around in circles. 40 years of not seeing God's will fulfilled for their lives. And it reminds me of the fact that there are people today, and you're willing to settle for second best. You're willing to settle for way less than what God has planned and purposed for you. And some are even prepared to go around in circles. Keep going around in circles. Never advancing, never going anywhere. Just constantly going around in circles. There's a song that's coming to mind. All my life's a circle, sunrise and sunset. Something like that. Brad, I was looking at you there because I was hoping for a nod from you. There you go. No, it's not, brother. So here they are. They're out of Egypt. Now that's good because they were slaves for 400 years, so it's good to get out of Egypt. And I suppose anything is better than having been in Egypt. But here's the point I want to make. Even though they were out of Egypt and now wandering about the wilderness for this 40 years, they were never meant to stay there. God had brought them out of Egypt not so they could settle and enjoy the Red Sea for a few weeks, not so that they can get into the wilderness and just enjoy walking around the wilderness for a few years. God never meant that they should stay there. I believe today that there are people in this place and you're still in Egypt. See, Egypt is a type, in the Bible it's used as a type of the world. The world outside of Christ, outside of God, without hope. Egypt represents that kind of world. And there are people here this morning, there are people all across Belfast, all across Northern Ireland and Ireland. There are people who are still in Egypt. People who are slaves. You know, you can be brought up in slavery. These people that came out, they were born in slavery. They knew nothing else. And it can be so easy to be born into a situation you know nothing else, so you think this is it. And yet there are people who are born in slavery and they are slaves to sin but don't know it because they think, this is it. Sadly, there are those who become slaves to alcohol, slaves to drugs, slaves to perversion, slaves to the love of money, slaves to greed, slaves to selfishness. And so it goes on. Slaves to sin. So there are people, I believe, here this morning as across this city who are still in Egypt. There are some people here this morning and you've come out of Egypt. Oh, you look back whenever you were a slave to sin. You were a slave to those circumstances. You've come out of Egypt. But your problem is that you stopped short of Canaan. You stopped short of God's best for you. God brought you out of Egypt to bring you to the Canary Islands. But you stopped off at Wales. My apology to Malwyn Jones if he's watching, my Welsh friend. Oh, they did well yesterday. I mean, they didn't do well. I mean, the best team and the only team to score was the team that went out, but that's a whole other story. Yeah, that's an applause for the Northern Ireland guys. Played 4 matches, lost 3, won 1, and they're heroes. Brilliant. And so many of us have stopped short. Many have stopped short of God's best for us. Some are still standing at the Red Sea complaining like it's everyone else's fault that things are not working out. You know, that's what the people of Israel did when they got to the Red Sea, because everything wasn't unfolded before them. In a moment, they began to complain. Who did they turn on? They turned on their leaders. I mean, Moses and Aaron were their heroes while they were in Egypt and getting them out, and they were following them. But once they got to the Red Sea, it wasn't working out the way they thought. So what did they do? They turned on their leaders. They complained. It was like it's someone else's fault, it's not ours. Some got beyond the Red Sea, and some are settling now in the wilderness, but not really going anywhere. Friends, I don't know about you, but I want God's best for me, and I want God's best for my family, and I want God's best for this church, and I want God's best for Northern Ireland. I want God's best for the island of Ireland. I'll tell you what Ireland should do next. Ireland should, well, I'll not even go there, but I want the best for Northern Ireland. I want the best for Ireland. I want the best for the UK. I want the best for Europe. I want the best. But the only way that we're ever going to get the best is if we build on the best foundation. And the best foundation is Jesus Christ himself. And we'll only get there, we'll only get the best when we build on that foundation. So God has led a foundation. He led a new foundation for the children of Israel. But how were they, here's the question, how were they going to build on that foundation? See, it's one thing to build a foundation, but what are you going to put on it? Foundations are built with a specific purpose in mind. And if you build something else on that foundation, then the foundation itself is going to be totally wasted. So the question is not just about the foundation that's been laid, but it's what were they going to build on the foundation. And I find that in reading the story of the people of Israel, that rather than build hope and faith, it's so easy to lose hope and lose faith. My hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. And it's so easy to lose our hope and our faith. And so instead of them building hope and faith on the foundation that God laid for them, they began to build doubt and fear. So that even though they'd left Egypt, they themselves, their bodies were in the wilderness. Think about this. Egypt was behind them. Their bodies were in the wilderness. Do you know where their minds and their hearts were? Back in Egypt. What a tragedy. We come out of something. Our bodies are here, but our minds and our hearts are still in what we come out of. God brought them out in order to give them something better, but they're now looking back to what they come out of and wish they were still there. And the problem is that some people leave Egypt, but they don't let Egypt leave them. Egypt being a type of the world, some people come out of the world and come into church. And it's good to get people out of the world and into church. And that's probably the easiest bit. The hardest bit is to get the world out of the people. We come out of the world, but the world is still in us. Jesus said, "Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." That's why we have the haddocks here today. Is that okay for me to, yeah? Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. But how many know that it's one thing to catch a fish, it's another thing to clean it? No reflection on the haddocks. But it's one thing to catch a fish. If any of you have ever done any fishing, I've done a bit in my day where you go out in the boat and you catch fish. I remember one day we caught 175 mackerel off the coast of Carrickfergus. 175 mackerel. Everyone on Brown Square had mackerel for their dinner on Saturday. All the streets smelt with mackerel. And it was easy to catch them. But you see, when it came to clean them out, when Jesus says, "I will make you fishers of men," he's actually telling us, you know what? You're going to go, you're going to reach people, you're going to bring them to me, he's saying. But that's not the end of the story, because there's a whole lot of cleaning out going to be done. I tell you what, this person needed cleaned out. There's not a person in this room, there's none of us that are so self-righteous that we think that we were ready-made Christians, because we're not. And so, friends, I don't say this to condemn anyone, but to say that not only do you need to make sure that you're building on the foundation of Christ, but you need to know what you're building on in terms of building on that foundation. There's a foundation laid. What are you building on? What are you putting on it? One of the main reasons why so many Christians fail to move on with God is because why they've made a commitment to Christ. They're not building the right stuff on that foundation. And some of you as Christians, you need to examine what you're building on that foundation. Some have asked for forgiveness. Forgive me, Lord, for the things that I've done. And God's given you forgiveness of that, there's no doubt. But now beyond that, He expects to see a change in your life. Some people want to take forgiveness but don't want to change. What are you building on the foundation? Paul goes on to say that what you build on it will be tested. It'll be tested with fire. And then he says that if it's not of God, it'll not remain. But then he says you'll still be saved, only though was one escaping through the flames. In other words, still saved, but saved by the skin of your teeth. Friends, I tell you, when it comes to standing before Jesus Christ, I don't want to hear Him say to me, Jack, you made it with the skin of your teeth. I want to hear Him say, well done, good and faithful servant. I want to know that I'm putting everything into serving Jesus Christ. So I'm not just simply saved by the skin of my teeth. I want to close in a moment. It's easy to become comfortable with second best or with a lot less than what God has for you. It's easy to settle in the wilderness. It's easy to settle away from what God has planned and purposed for you. But I want to ask this in closing. 3 very simple questions. Number 1, what foundation are you building on? Because you're building on a foundation. You're either building on someone else's foundation that they've laid for you, or you're laying your own foundation, excluding God, or you are building on the foundation of Jesus Christ. What foundation are you building on? Some people are building on a foundation of good works. And Paul makes it clear that it's not by works lest any man should boast. We will not be saved by works. Some people are building on religion. And those who build on religion, they then come off with this comment that all religions may be different, but all religions worship the one God, the same God. And they know nothing about God if they make that comment. Do you know that Islam says this, and everyone says Christians and Muslims all serve the same God? My Bible tells me God so loved the world that He gave His only Son. Do you know what Islam says? There's only one God. Allah is His name. And Allah has no son. How can we be the same? None of us are ever going to go on a plane and stand up and shout, Jesus. And then that's the last words that people hear. It's not what Christians do. So we're not the same. Religion is man's attempt to reach God. Every religion is man's attempt to reach God. But the cross became God's endeavor to reach humanity. Do you know what? God loved you so much that He never invented a religion for you. God doesn't want you to become religious. God loved you so much that He designed a cross. We sung about that today. And on that cross, He allowed His Son to be nailed so that you could be forgiven and come to know Him as your Lord and Savior. So what foundation are you building on? Second, if you're building on Christ, what are you building on that foundation? Because someday that will be tested. Third and finally, what kind of foundation are you laying for others? See, you might be able to say, well, I'm building on a foundation that was laid for me. You can change that. But now my question to you is this. What foundation are you building for others to build on? If those close to you are to build on your foundation, what are they building on? That's a comment that should challenge all of us. Every parent in this room, every leader in the community, every leader in society, every one of us who believes that others are looking to us and following us. We're going to have several godparents here today, 6 or 7. 6 or 7. Have we decided yet? 6 or 7. Any godparents? 6? Okay. 6 godparents. That's awesome. Do you know what a responsibility of godperson is? To be an example to the child they're standing for. That's the responsibility of a godparent in reality. It's not just so we can stand up here and look nice and look pretty and so on, and to give this a little bit of support. Well, that's awesome. It's more than that. It's to be the example. And so every one of us, whatever role we have to play in life, someone's looking to us, someone's going to follow us. So my question to you this morning, my question to all of us is, what foundation are you building on? And what kind of foundation are you laying for others to build on as they come after you? I trust and pray this morning that we'll all heed the word of God and build on the right foundation, the foundation of Christ.